Hi, and welcome back. Today, we're going to continue in our study in the book of James. If you were with us last time, then you were with us as we started this study in the book of James. And we just walked from verse number 1 all the way down to verse number 5 and just walked through the scriptures to see what it had in store for us. And what we found was first an introduction. James, who is the author, introduces himself as a servant of God. And then he introduces the audience. He says he's writing to the 12 tribes of the dispersion. And that's impactful because one, James, who would have been a leader in the church in Jerusalem, is now writing to Christians that have been dispersed, most likely from Jerusalem to countries and areas abroad. And so he's writing to them to encourage them, but to also give them practical advice on how to live this life. And where does he start? Well, he starts by saying, I want you to count it all joy when you meet troubles of various kinds. And he says, I want you to count it all joy because of what the end result will be. That as you endure or as you bear under those trying situations, there's going to be a product that is produced, and that product is a changed person, someone who was previously missing something, but what was missing is now complete. And he says, you'll be perfect, lacking in nothing. And so we worked through that. And if you didn't get a chance to see that video, well, I'll leave a link to it in the description, and hopefully you'll get a chance to go back. But as I mentioned, I want to continue in James. And so we're still in chapter 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually pick up at verse number 5. So James chapter 1, starting at verse number 5. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double minded man, unstable in all his ways. James continues his advice or his wisdom to those individuals that have been dispersed. And what he's saying is that if you find yourself in a situation to where you're lacking wisdom, and you should ask for it. And I find it interesting that he asks, or he goes down this path of, hey, you need to ask for wisdom if indeed you're lacking it. And the question you have to ask is, why is this so important? Why have this be the second thing that you tell to a group of individuals who have recently become refugees, whose life has been turned upside down? Why is wisdom so very important? And I think that's where we should start. What is wisdom and why is it so valuable? Well, wisdom, from a biblical perspective, wisdom is the capacity to understand and so have skill in living. What we're actually talking about, it's the ability to not only live life, but to live it well. It's the decisions that you make and the discernment that you have. And so when we talk about wisdom, it's that ability to navigate life's decisions, its circumstances, its challenges, and do so in a successful way so that you can live life well. And James is talking to a group of individuals who, again, have been displaced. They're in a new phase of their life. They're no longer at home. They're no longer near the family that they once knew. They've probably lost their job. If you were rich, that source of income is gone. You're probably poor now. And if you were poor previously, well, that continues on. But the manner in which you survived, you're going to be looking for a new way to survive. And so in this new world, how do I navigate it? How do I know what decisions to make? Well, for that, you need wisdom. And it's very interesting that he gave this lesson then because it's still so appropriate now. Each and every one of us, we enter different phases of our lives, or we enter different circumstances of our lives, and each one of those situations can be brand new to us. And in that, we need the ability to discern what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is better. And so If you just think about it from your own personal life, at a certain point, you enter into adulthood. You definitely need discernment as you leave home. How about when you first get married? You need discernment. And you have kids and you enter off into parenthood, and that's an unknown. Or when your kids become teenagers, that's certainly an unknown. And so you definitely need wisdom for each one of those phases. Or let's say that you actually are on your job and you go from being an individual contributor to now you're the boss. You're definitely going to need discernment for that. Or how about when you've run your course and you're ready to retire and you're entering into that retirement phase of your life? What do I do now? How do I retire successfully? You need discernment and you need wisdom for that as well. And so the lesson that James is giving to his audience is so appropriate for us today. We need discernment. We need wisdom in every phase of our lives. And so James says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. James says God is ready and willing to give his wisdom to us and to do it in a generous way. And when he does, he won't reproach us. He won't fault find against us, or he won't criticize us. He won't say, you should know better, but he gladly and cheerfully gives to us. You know, the proverbial writer talks about this in Proverbs chapter 2. I want to actually go and take a look at what he says there. Proverbs chapter 2, I want to start looking at verse number 6. He says, for the Lord gives wisdom. This is exactly what James was saying, that if you lack wisdom, go to God. And so the writer here says, the Lord, he gives wisdom. Let's continue reading. He says, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. When we pursue wisdom, when we ask God for wisdom, the text says he gives it generously. And we can see his generosity here in the particular text. Not only is he willing to give us that wisdom, but notice also what he says, these great gifts that we find. He says that God will become our shield. He will become our guardian. He will become our watch or our overseer. He gives generously because he wants us to be able to discern these particular situations that we run into on a regular basis. But then, if we continue reading, we get to see the power of wisdom. And so we're going to continue in Proverbs chapter 2, and we'll pick up in verse number 9. He says, with this asking for wisdom, notice what he says. You'll receive wisdom, and then this is the power of wisdom. He says, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil. He says, when you ask God for wisdom and he gives it to you, one of the first things that'll happen is that you will understand righteousness, justice, and equity. And because of that, you will now be able to discern every good path. That's great news because remember, you've just ventured into an area that you're uncertain of. You don't necessarily know what decisions to make. You don't know how to live well. And so, what God says is that He will make every good path known to you, whether to go right, whether to go left, what is good, what is bad, what is better becomes clear because God is giving you that wisdom, and that wisdom makes everything so plain and so clear for you. He also says this is because wisdom has come into your heart and you will love knowledge. Not only will you be discerning, but you'll be taking in more information, and this information will be pleasing to you because now you're more adept at your surroundings. This new area you're in, you better understand it because this knowledge is now coming into your heart. And now it's basically compounding. Your more aware of your surroundings, you're more understanding of what's going on, and now you're able to make even better decisions. I mean, just think about it. Wisdom, in and of itself, is not defined by one single act. If someone makes the right decision one time, you don't immediately call them wise. But the person you call wise is someone who has consistently demonstrated that they are able to perceive and discern the right course of action. And that individual who has done it over and over again, that's the individual that's wise. And so in this text, what he's actually saying is that this wisdom comes to us, this understanding, this discernment. And now we have this knowledge that comes into our hearts. And we love this knowledge because it continues to enrich our ability to understand and to discern. And that's true wisdom. He goes on to say that discretion will watch over you, understanding or wisdom, it will guard you, and you will be delivered from the way of evil. In other words, you will be able to live this life, this phase of your life, you'll be able to live it well. And that's why we're asking for that wisdom. And again, irrespective of the situation and how new it is or how challenging it might be, wisdom is the key to navigate that situation. And so, if we keep looking at what the text says, let's go back to James. If we go back to James chapter 1, he says we need to ask for wisdom. But there's something he says about this asking for wisdom that we need to take into an account. Let's go back to James chapter 1 and pick up in verse number 6. He says, but let him ask in faith. So for the person who is asking for this wisdom, there's a way in which we must ask, and that ask is done in faith. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double minded man, unstable in all his ways. James says that a double minded man, a man who one day is zealous and gun ho and certain that God will give him the wisdom, and then the next day doubtful, wondering whether or not God will hear him and give him, that individual should not suppose that wisdom is going to come his way. The text says he's unstable in all of his ways. And it's interesting that James says that. And I think it's appropriate that James says that given the nature of how you acquire wisdom. Wisdom is not something that simply comes to you all at once. And we kind of talked about that in Proverbs chapter 2. I actually want to go back there and I want to pick up in verse number 1 because the author actually gives us some insight into what the journey and what that search for wisdom entails. And so Proverbs chapter 2, starting with verse number 1, you can see that this is a father talking to his son. And this is the conversation that he's having with his son about gaining this wisdom. And he says, this is how I want you to search for it. He first says, my son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. He says to his son, first, I want you to hear what I'm saying and receive these words and treasure them up. And what are the words that he gives him? He first says, I want you to tune your ears towards wisdom. He says, what you listen to is important, but what I want you to listen to is words of wisdom. And then he says, I want you to incline your heart to understanding. What is it that you're searching for? What are you opening yourself up to receive? What you should be opening yourself up to receive is wisdom. And then he says, I want you to actually call out for it. And this is that asking God for it. He says it in two different ways. He says, if you call out for insight, and then he says, if you raise your voice for understanding. Two different ways of saying the same thing. I'm looking for wisdom and I'm looking for discernment. And then he describes that search. When you get to verse number 4, he says, if you seek it like silver, and if you search for it as hidden treasures, he says this is like a very precious metal that's buried in the earth. The journey and the search to seek it out, to uncover it and possess it, it's not for the faint of heart. If you think about mining today, it's a very dirty job. And it can put you in some dark, dangerous situations. The environment for finding those rare minerals, it's not easy. And it's not for the faint of heart. And so James says that the double-minded man, someone who's doubtful, someone who's not committed to the entire journey, they shouldn't expect to gain wisdom from God, because the search for wisdom is a difficult one. But it's one that definitely does pay off. And what the consistency is, what you're needing is consistency so that you can reach that payoff. If you search for it as silver, or if you search for it as great treasure, he says, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and you will find the knowledge of God. For the person who truly seeks, they're going to find wisdom. And that wisdom, it's going to shield you. The text says it's going to guard you. It's going to watch over you. And the end result is that you will be able to understand every path, every good path for this phase of your life. As you enter into new circumstances and you're uncertain, be sure to call out to God for wisdom, for that ability to live life well and to discern the path that you should go. I want to read this passage to you one more time. James chapter 1, starting with verse number 1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes of the dispersion, greetings. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways.